welcome to the monthly webinar of African Liberty, and this is the month of July, and we are very excited to have all of you here, those that are joining us from different countries. My name is Andrew Monganga, and I am the communications intern at African Liberty. Anoba Babatunde Ibrahim is not with us today. He's the managing editor at African Liberty, but expect to have him in the coming webinar. And this evening, I have very important guests that have joined us. We are very excited actually to have them here because they are experts in the field, and they will help us understand the topic of today, which is visa-free Africa, a case of Kenya and Rwanda and the implications for trade. Now, I have with me our guests. We have Dr. Margaret Monyani, who is the Senior Migration Researcher at the Institute for Security Studies. Before joining ISS, she was the guest researcher at the Center for Human Rights at Friedrich-Alexander University in Germany. She holds a Ph.D. in international relations from WITS. Her research interests include migration, gender, and security. Then we also have Dr. Benjamin. Dr. Benjamin, I don't know how I'm going to pronounce the other name, but please forgive me if I don't pronounce it correctly, but he's Dr. Benjamin Schraven. He is a development researcher, consultant, and migration expert who has done consultants work for the European Commission, the United Nations, and the International Organization for Migration, among others, on various issues relating to displacement and migration. He is also an associate fellow of the German Institute of Development and Sustainability. He specializes in the links between global warming and migration governance in Africa and beyond, freedom of movement, diasporas, and remittances. He has had longer teaching and research stays in several African countries, especially in Ghana. I actually got to know Dr. Benjamin through one of his articles. So Dr. Benjamin and Dr. Margaret, you're most welcome to today's webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and also kudos for the perfect pronunciation of my last name.
Thank you. Okay, so today's webinar is on visa-free for African countries. Of course, we have Kenya, we have Rwanda, but our perfect example, we have perfect examples, that is Kenya and Rwanda, that took up this step. And then we want to see what are the trade implications. And so this webinar will explore the steps that have been taken by Kenya and Rwanda towards this policy, and we'll also dive into the implications of the continental integration, that is the African Continental Free Trade Area. We'll look at the economic development and cultural exchange, thereby highlighting the benefits and challenges of the visa-free Africa. And like I said, my two important guests are here. Maybe I would first of all pose this question to Dr. Benjamin. How does this policy of having, a visa-free area align with classical liberal principles of individual liberty and freedom of movement? Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you also very much for inviting me to this event. It's a pleasure and honor for me. But to answer your question, I think if we look at how, let's say, classical liberalism, if we look at, for instance, the old liberal parties and movements in Europe, for instance, if we look at how they think, how they perceive free movement of persons within Europe, or within the European Union, the Schengen area, well, yes, obviously it must align very well with classical principles of individual liberty, with kind of classical liberalism, However, I think that only refers also to Europeans or EU citizens. Liberals in the, now not the American, but in the European sense and context, so referring to classical liberalism, are usually also stricter regarding irregular migration, irregular migrants and asylum seekers in comparison to left-wingers.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Doc. And maybe I'll give the same question to Dr. Margaret to also maybe she would want to explain further on this one. Thank you, Doc.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. Let me put the face to the person. Yes. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak this evening. This is a very important topic. So when we talk about classical liberalism, like just the doctor has said, Benjamin, it's of course is about many of the things he has mentioned, but most importantly, reducing government barriers to movement. If you look at Africa, I always say migration or mobility, it's the center of our story. Like, name any African who thinks wherever they are at any given moment, it's their home. No, we read about the history. We were like, personally, I'm Kenyan, but we came from Congo forest, before we settled in Kenya. All those stories, we hear them in history. And so when it comes at the continental level, Africa as we know it, with its political boundaries, the Eurocentric political boundaries as we know them now, we realize that this brought in restrictions now. I'm Kenyan, they're Ugandans, but we are Africans. So, and then you realize that there has been efforts to put in place policies that will restrict movement, but they don't stop movement. That's the thing. They just restrict or label certain kinds of movements as illegal, but they do not necessarily stop migration of individuals. So countries like Kenya is the newest kid on block, I would say, and Rwanda actually 2 years ago, because we have other countries that had already adopted this policy. If you look at the Africa openness visa openness index report by the Africa Development Bank, it shows all this. If you read about the 2023 one, it says Rwanda, it mentions Rwanda. I think in the 2024 one, Kenya will be mentioned, that Rwanda has just joined, is the 4th country to join those. So it's about significantly reducing government barriers to movement, by eliminating the need for visas. So by adopting such visas, then such policies, then individuals, citizens of these countries or citizens are then empowered to make travel decisions. And I must commend Rwanda. I'm not saying that I don't commend Kenya in the same case, because Rwanda is such a tiny country with just 12 million people. And I think this is a very strategic move, because then in East Africa, joining the EAC, which has say the Eastern Africa region with 12 countries and a population of 450 million, thereabout, people, it means now you're expounding the market for your goods. I mean, look at that. That is just in East Africa alone. But then look at if you open that more, maybe to the whole continent, because we have had this debate in 2018. If you've been following the issues around migration and free movement of people, you know, and the Africa FPM, the Free Movement Protocol, was adopted, but it has never been ratified. Only 4 countries, and the smallest, Chad, the biggest countries on the continent still have this apathy. And there have been so many studies around it. Why are African countries, with all the benefits we know that comes with free movement, there is still this apathy towards ratifying the Free Movement Protocol as compared to the AfCFTA, that is the one for the trade agreement, has more than 35 ratifications as we speak. So you see it has a full operational secretariat and all that. So what I would say in a nutshell, not to take much time because I want this to allow also space for engagement, is that such policies they significantly reduce governmental barriers to movement, as we are seeing. And then also the restrictive immigration controls that I spoke about. of course, there have been many African countries, and especially in the post-COVID era. And this is why I say I commend these two countries, because in the post-COVID era, after many economies collapsed, and these two countries are able to open up borders. I live in South Africa, and there are these debates about if we opened about our borders, I mean, you know, it will people will come in for the jobs. But there are these two countries that are making these bold steps to say, we are allowing people to come in. You can travel, you can come here on a free note. But though we will discuss the Kenyan case, because I don't think it's really free visa. Yes.
Exactly. And I mean, thank you for bringing in those practical examples. And for challenging countries like Zambia, you've challenged us very well, because you've given a very good example of Rwanda being a small country, but it was able to take such a bold step. Thank you. Before you say everything, because you're about to touch to some of the questions I was about to ask, maybe let me ask Dr. Benjamin, before I go on with my questions, Doc. For those that are joining us again, this discussion is very interesting. We are talking about, you know, we are trying to explore the steps that Kenya and Rwanda has taken towards the visa-free travel within Africa, and also trying to look at the implications for the continental integration, economic development, and also cultural exchange. Now, if you have a question, please feel free to type in the Q&A. And if you have a comment, please feel free to type in the chat box. Now, to Dr. Benjamin, how might the visa-free travel between Kenya and Rwanda promote free trade and economic growth in both countries? You know, the African Continental Free Trade Area, and this is an African thing that has been, you know, brought in, and just like Doc had said, some countries have agreed, but the ratification processes, they are still a bit skeptical about it. But then I want you to just touch on the fact on how might this visa-free travel, how will it help promote the free trade and also economic growth?
Yeah, well, I think obviously, if it is easier to travel from one country to another, it's also easier to find opportunities, to find trading partners, to networking with potential trade partners regarding general economic activities for economic exchange. You attract workforce, and probably you see a growing diaspora of traders, of a certain workforce. I mean, intensifying the ties, for instance, between Kenya and another country. I mean, of course, Kenya has already several diasporas, that's for sure. But I mean, that would also certainly increase the growth of such diasporas, and accordingly, the exchange of all sorts, the economic exchange, trade-related exchange, cultural exchange between Kenya and these other countries. But there's also one thing I would like to add now as a very general point. We are always talking about, and we also see that in Europe, for instance. Well, I mean, this free movement and visa-free travel that increases economic opportunities and trade and cultural exchange. But I mean, we should not forget that free trade is not only an economic, or should not only be an economic or cultural issue, but I think usually to make it successful, there should also be some kind of a political narrative. I wouldn't say a political vision, but let's call it a political narrative. If we look at the ECOWAS free movement protocol, which, by the way, I mean, people in Europe do not know that, but it's always important to remind them, is older than the Schengen area, for instance, and the Schengen free movement area, which became operational only in Europe in 1993. And ECOWAS already discussed the free movement protocol in the late 1970s. It was not only about the ECOWAS free movement protocol. It wasn't only about this economic opportunities and all that, but I think it was also or it also went hand in hand with this political idea of overcoming colonially induced borders with a certain, if you will, Pan-African vision to reconnect. Because I mean, in particular in West Africa, you have the situation, or you have the situation that colonial powers were creating borders in if you look at it from the coastlines in a vertical manner, whereas traditional settlement patterns in West Africa were rather horizontal, so really cutting across traditional settlement areas, cutting across traditional trade connections and all of that. And so I think that shows us also, I mean, despite all the setbacks and all that, ECOWAS Free Movement Protocol is, I would say, in the end also a success story, but also because there was also this political narrative attached to it of you know, of somewhat overcoming those colonial border structures and territory structures. So I think to really make such a thing successful, you need to have this political story behind it. Also, one last sentence on that. If you look at Europe, it's not only, it's the same virtually. It's a bit of a different story, but I mean, it's the same in a way that, I mean, people are saying, well, it's not only nice, you know, for the economic benefits and a free movement also of labor force within Europe, but I mean, it's also, the story is of course also that, well, I can travel from here to Oslo in Norway or to Spain without really crossing visibly seeable borders. And that's also a way of overcoming all those centuries of wars and rivalry between the different European powerhouses. So I think this political narrative is also very important for such free movement endeavors.
Interesting. Now, I think I was reading one of your articles, Dr. Benjamin, on, I think that was on sustainable economic development in Africa. When you were writing this article, this is kind of a deliberate question. When you were writing this article or this paper, I should believe this was more like a policy paper or something. Did you think about how sustainable economic development in Africa could be if we, if the borders were, if we had like a borderless Africa? And if I'm not mistaken, again, I think you should have written like a policy paper again on borderless Africa, something to do like with that. Then I want to understand, in your paper, were you able to think about how there can be sustainable economic development in Africa if the whole continent was actually borderless? This is a deliberate question.
Well, no. This article was rather about the struggle between certain interest groups lobbying for free movement on one hand side, and some also supporting structures from like Europe and other places. But on the other hand, also let's say counter forces, especially from Europe. Because I mean, Europe is so mad about tackling what's called the root causes of irregular migration, and I mean, free movement has also become sort of a battleground for these endeavors. On the one hand side, also Europeans say, yeah, well, I mean, Africans should really invest more into free movement and the Agenda 2063. That's a good sign on the one hand side, but on the other hand side, I mean, there are also so many well, voices, and not only voices but also active political measurement trying to prevent certain, at least in certain areas, attempts to establish free movement patterns, just in fear of irregular mobility. And that was actually what this what this paper was about. I mean, this European struggle, we also called, I think it was called supporting or thwarting, because that, I mean, on the one hand side, you would like to support it because of the, also not only of the economic benefits, but also of political benefits. On the other hand side, I mean, you do everything, you know, also to well, as we call it, to thwart those efforts, at least in certain areas. And that was this article about, I think, this vision of a borderless Africa. We are very far away from it. As also, I mean, as also many other places in the world. I mean, this vision of becoming borderless is somewhat appealing, but I mean, we are very far away, and not only because of like European influence, but also because there are many other factors at play.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, for trade to be implemented, there must be movement of people. And I want to direct this question to Dr. Margaret. How can visa-free travel between, between African countries facilitate individual freedom? I know the borders might be open, but then can this really facilitate individual freedom? I mean, freedom of movement and all those kinds of freedom. Maybe you'd want to explain further on this one, Dr. Margaret.
Yes, thank you. Just before I move to your question, I also wanted to add something on what Doctor has said. So on the previous question about whether this free visa travel between Kenya and Rwanda promote free trade and economic growth. So what we need to understand, the free visa, what is the free visa for Kenya? It allows at least 90 days. So for the Kenyan one you pay for, but now for the Rwandan one is 30 days for the people from the AU, Commonwealth, and Francophone. Look at those number of days. So what we need to understand before we talk about promoting free trade, there must be very, what is the infrastructure? Because visa free is about entry. Just that is just the baby part of this whole process. So for us to, this is what I've always made an argument, even if you read in the literature, that is when we say borders are closed or are open, if you say the borders are open, first it starts with, before you move to the other country, how is it easy or hard for you to attain authorization, in this case a visa, to go to country B from country A? So in this case, we see Kenya and Rwanda are making it easy. That is one. But then there is also the other side of the border, where now we look at your participation as a person who has crossed, as a migrant, or the person who has crossed the borders. How open or closed is the country in terms of you participating in the economy? So if you have 30 days, you can come around, hang around for 30 days, but for you to engage in business, then you must have 1, 2, 3, 3. You know, like if there's still more other stringent rules in place, then that border is still closed. So this is what we need to look beyond just the entry level to say, what are these countries then putting in place to allow, if the infrastructure, if the political narrative of what my other panelist is talking about is not there. Because I've seen in some countries in East Africa, I don't want to mention because I see some of us are from those. I see in some countries, when Kenyans go to those countries, they know the Kenyans will come and finish us, because Kenyans are very, business-minded, very aggressive. So they fear them. The locals just fear them. Those are Kenyans. No, do not allow them to run your hotels here. Do not allow, that narrative is there. So it should just go beyond. We need to engage further to look at these economies or these governments or the structures in place. That are they supporting business? What are the issues around import duty, all those manner of things? If they're not nicely, structured, visa-free will not do anything. People will just come around, hang around for maybe tourism, earn a little money here. But when it comes to money that matters, these big investments, then we'll not tap into those ones. Yeah, so then we'll talk about in terms of individual, does it really promote individual freedom? Still the same question, the same issues, because this is what happens. Unfortunately, when borders, like in the Kenyan case, the Kenyan government says they've adopted free visa. That's what the government announced. The president, actually, my president announced that. But to be honest, it looks like it was a very not well thought out, because they announce something, then after a week he says no, and then they introduce a fee. Now, it means people who travel need to have money. So if you have to go to Kenya right now, unless you have money, you will not get the visa or whatever they're calling it there. You need some $30 if I'm not, unless you are from South Africa and some other few countries that they have, I mean, ticked off the list.
Yeah.
So so in terms of free movement, you know, individual, that's what we are saying. It is when these countries do not spell out clearly, you can spend 90 days doing what? You know, I know they're on the websites, but do they actually engage those conversations to say, we are allowing you this much freedom in our country? Freedom to do this while you are here for the 90 days? They talk about business, but what kind of businesses can you engage in 30 days? So unless you are very conversant with that, you'll go into a different country, the neighboring country, and you'll find that there's nothing you can do apart from eat in the restaurants, enjoy, take pictures, and go back. So it depends. With the also we see there is, I will say, there is the south to south securitization that is becoming very prominent on the continent, and this is something we need to be very honest about as Africans. We always think about how blacks are securitized when they move to the north, but on the continent it is one of those things that is it's a big problem. I mean, in South Africa, we know the problem of xenophobia and how black migrants are targeted. I studied the Somali migrants for my PhD in Kenya, and they're targeted in Kenya by the mere fact that they come from a territory that is inhabited by Al-Shabaab. And so people just say, in fact, Kenyans on the street, they'll just see a Somali and they say Al-Shabaab. I remember even in my own local store, there is a Somali guy who was running a small store by my place when I was living in Kenya, and we will call him pirate, you know. it's just you say, I went to buy sugar by the pirate's shop, you know. It looks like a very normal language, but when you look at it, this is the narratives that are contradicting the results we want to achieve with this free visa and the freedom of movement structures we are trying to put in place. So then if there is no supportive narrative, we are having these policies, but then there is a countering securitized narrative in the air, which we see. This Kenya and South Africa, which we are not talking about today, are just the two examples I've given. But if you go to West Africa, the stories are between Ghanaians and Nigerians are just way too much. You don't even want to get into those politics, you know. So it goes beyond just, there is a lot we need to do, honest discussions that Africans need to have amongst themselves regarding this. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much, Doc. I actually agree with you because before I came into Kenya, I arrived in Kenya like a week ago from Zambia. And before that, I had to apply for the electronic travel authorization known as ETA. I didn't pay anything, but the people from other countries like Nigeria and maybe Nigeria, Ghana, they had to pay. So I certainly agree with you. And other restrictions that come in, you come into Kenya, but then you are given, if you are coming to do business, like you have said, you are given some restrictions and here and there. Okay, I think we have some questions in the Q&A, and maybe let me just read through a number of them so that we could answer. So Krista Manza says, how can visa-free travel contribute to the achievement of Africa Union's Agenda of 2063 and the UN Sustainable Development Goals? This is one question. I think I can give this one to Dr. Benjamin, but to you, Dr. Margaret, how can African countries balance the need of security and order with the benefits of a visa-free travel? I mean, I think this is a very important question, but maybe we can go to Dr. Benjamin and then we come to Dr. Margaret. Doc.
Well, I mean, this question is rather an easy one because, I mean, we have so much evidence globally, but also from different African settings that free movement always promotes economic growth. And also, I said it before, this certain also desired political side effects. However, I think in any case, it will be important, and we've raised some of these issues, not only about allowing people to cross the borders, but I mean, it's also about allowing them, and this is those 3 stages of the free movement protocol in ECOWAS, for instance, to settle down and enjoy a certain degree of economic and other freedoms. Otherwise, I mean, well, entering a country for 90 days, I mean, it's just like the same as tourist visa, you know, you can go around and well, I don't know, in the case of Kenya, you can watch some elephants or I don't know what, but I mean, there has to be more about it. And I think if you also allow me to say, I mean, if you really want to make it a success, you need to convince the bigger countries. The smaller ones are not really the problem, but the bigger ones within the region, they are always kind of skeptical. And also in an African settings, you also need to convince the Europeans, because I mean we've talked about it before. I mean, there's a lot of securitization, not talking about the African securitization of migration, but I mean you have the European securitization of African migration, and I mean that is actually once again also a major obstacle for also free movement or visa free arrangements within Africa. So in a nutshell, that would be my answer to this first question then.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I know we're talking about issues of trade here, but one important question Dr. Margaret has come to. I think I'll give this one to you to answer, how African countries can actually balance, you know, the need of security and border with the benefits of a visa-free situation. I think this question is from Krista. How would you answer this one? Thank you.
Yes. So actually, the security question is a valid one. Let's not even downplay it, because we are living on a continent where we have ISIS in Mozambique, we have Al-Shabaab, all these man. If you study the Horn of Africa, I mean, how many terror organizations operate in those parts of the parts of the world? And if you look at the mobility in East Africa, if you are to be honest, many of the people who are crossing borders, they are crossing borders forcefully because of political instability, because of conflict, and all those manner of things. So insecurity is a real deal, is a real problem on the continent. But then there is the need to also open borders so that you can tap into skills portability, you know, labor mobility, all this that can benefit countries. I think one of them is to look at the issue of integrated border management. I mean, countries need to start, and I'm liking what is happening. I've always, I don't know, I hope there's no one from the African Union here who will shoot me in the leg. I've always thought maybe this pushing free movement at the continental level, we should allow it to morph from the regions. Let the regions, like what we see. Why do I say so? Because if you look at the Visa Openness Index report, it shows since 2018, African countries have been have had that apathy of ratifying the African Union's FPM, Freedom of Movement Protocol. But again, in those many years, the number of bilateral agreements between countries has increased. So you find bilateral agreement and just movement within. And I was speaking to someone this year, yes, this year or last year from ECOWAS. I think it should be this year, who was already saying ECOWAS is already setting up a Schengen kind of visa, and they're already talking about the infrastructure and all that. So you see, at the rec level, they're doing so much. So I was one of those people who think we should have just allowed them to grow organically, and then it gets to a point when then now we get to the let's merge it to the continental level, because then you ask yourself, why would a country, a region like West Africa that is so well done with in terms of movement within the region, and East Africa, if there are 15 countries in ECOWAS, I don't know how, 6 in EAC, 8. So why are we not getting the ratifications? Why if they have already tested the benefits of free movement within the region? So, but then you realize there have been attempts at a bilateral, like the integrated border management between different countries. Let me use the one I know, between like the one South Africa tried to have a border management authority recently. But then we realize this border management infrastructure should be about meeting the needs of those crossing the borders, but not targeting individuals from in terms of stopping certain individuals because of their geographical origins. We don't want these people from this side, so we will put a border here so that to stop them, you know, like what the EU does. We want to stop movement from the south. So it is an infrastructure that is aimed to, what is the word? Like sticking people to regions, as opposed to how do we put a structure in place that will be able to meet the needs of the people as we see? Because truth be told, when we are crossing borders, we are looking at this free visa, but then human smuggling and trafficking, those networks are very elaborate on the continent. So we can't just, that is one of them, just integrated border management, and also maybe having targeted visa policies, you know, all those. But most importantly, I think sometimes it's just around fears. I've been in these meetings and you'll hear member states, it is more of fears. It is never even sometimes evidence-based. We just know people from that side will come and steal jobs. Which people? Which people will come and will come and steal jobs? I mean, because if I look at even East Africa, maybe I don't know. People, maybe South Africa is very different, by the way. South Africa, you see people from Zimbabwe coming here to get jobs. In East Africa, you would rarely find even Kenyans going to Uganda to get jobs. There are very few. They don't have that. Maybe to go and get merchandise and come back.
Yeah, and so, they're from the East African region, yeah?
Yeah, so it's a little different. The reasons for movement are very different. So there are many mechanisms, but they need, there is the need, because if you look at this moment in 2024, we are talking about 2063. It sounds way too far. But again, we do not have even digitized registers on the continent. We don't have. Even countries like Kenya, Kenya has tried, but Uganda doesn't have. Even in East Africa itself, they don't have. When you move across border, yes, it's easy. Like when I went to Rwanda, I actually literally just gave them my Kenyan ID and I moved across, which was very good. I really just want to experiment and it was very good. But I'm not sure they still have my data there. I didn't see anybody take my data to know I've moved here to here. I mean, electronically. I'm not sure those records are still there. So there is a lot that can be done, but without downplaying the security question, because you wouldn't want to see your government putting your life in danger, honestly.
Okay, thank you. Interesting discussion here. I'm loving how you are bringing in the evidence-based approach, and also the very good examples there. Allow me just to recognize the presence of Dr. Jamila Basani. She was one of our guests in the last month webinar. Doc, you're most welcome. We are very glad to have you here. And very interesting comments, I think, in the chat and questions as well. But, you know, we would love to answer all the questions. But let me just go through the comments. So, okay. Okay, so Valentine says, can African nations agree on creating and using a cohesion fund? Interesting. Then I think another interesting comment from Lawson says, very true, you can't just open the border and still have rules and regulations that hinder migrants to do business. Interesting. Okay, then I think Abdul also says a lot will definitely need to be put in place in order to make this policy a success. Okay, now having heard from Dr. Margaret, I think let's hear from Dr. Benjamin. I know this question I'm about to ask is kind of related to the previous question, but then maybe you'd want to add on what could be the potential risks and challenges that are associated with this policy. And then how do you think can we address this, especially with regards to respecting individual responsibility? Dr. Benjamin.
Well, I think Dr. Margaret has already named a lot of issues. There might be the actual danger of increased crime, like really organized crime, trafficking, human trafficking, the alleged fear of, I mean, not only the alleged fear, but I mean actually an increase in xenophobia, resulting in social conflicts, the whole securitization story. And I mean, you've mentioned, Andrew, in the beginning. I mean, I've also been living and working in West Africa, and I can only confirm that, you know, in West Africa, it's mainly, oh, but then all the Nigerians are coming and, you know, they're spoiling our business. And, you know, you have those stories and you have those narratives. It's not only about, you know, the European fear of African migration. You also have this in African settings, and, you know, that Ghanaians are afraid of Nigerian traders, and you know, all those stories about stealing jobs. And I mean, you have actually the risks also of terrorism. And I mean, actually, it's meanwhile, it's of course not only the Horn of Africa, which is a highly unstable, insecure region, well, also with the risks of you know, affecting neighboring countries. Of course, I mean, it's also the whole of the Sahel in West Africa. I mean, 15 years ago, when I was living at the working at the border between Ghana and Burkina Faso, that was a totally different region. I mean, now, I mean, after all those coups and after 2011, it's a completely different ballpark, you know. So there are a lot of risks, of course, that, I mean, that free movement is not creating, but I mean, I would say a lot of risks that free movement might actually further increase, if you will. And I think Dr. Margaret has also mentioned a lot of countermeasures, or potential countermeasures, how to encounter that. But I think one major issue is probably the best medicine to also counter the risk is a general confession that policymakers, that countries, that societies want free movement. That, I mean, you do not go back from free movement and say, okay, but in case of a crisis, we close our borders again. Again, if you look at the historical experience in West Africa, 1983, when Nigeria expelled, I think the estimates vary between 1.5 and over 2 million people, mainly from Ghana. That was a major setback for all those regional ECOWAS free movement protocol related endeavors. And that was really, really bad. And I think it took a long time that those efforts to establish free movement in the region finally, you know, could recover. So I think what is actually needed is a general confession. Yes, we want free movement. Basically, we see the risks. We see all the risks. I mean, we think about measures how we could effectively mitigate those risks. But in the end, it's free movement that we want, because we see more benefits than disadvantages, in a nutshell.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Dr. Benjamin. And now I would love to just invite those that want to speak to please just raise their hand. And then if you have any contribution, or if you have any question to our wonderful panelists here, please, you can just raise your hand and I'll allow you to speak. I saw a couple of hands before, and if you want to speak, please just raise your hand. And then I'll allow you to speak. Okay, as we're still waiting for that, there's another question, I think, in the comment section. Before I go to the questions that I have here, how transparent and accountable are the process related to visa-free travel, and what recourse do individuals have if their rights are violated? Dr. Margaret, would you want to tackle this one? Thank you.
Yes, I think I already mentioned this to say what we, like when I was mentioning my president, when my president mentioned that we are going to have Kenya visa-free, all that, that's all we had. But you see, it's like signing that terms and whatever, the one you usually tick with so many things under it and you have not read. So what I'm saying is this. This is that is a very important question, and I think these are questions that we should ask. But there is also something I realized when I was carrying out research in Kenya and Ethiopia, migration governance and all that. There is something about migration information, legit migration information in terms of, say, which countries has the government signed labor agreements with, So what I see in that part of the world is that people, I don't know if they have lost faith in the government, but they would prefer getting this information online. They would prefer, like those Kenyans who want to move to the Middle East for jobs, they would prefer going to TikTok or is it YouTube about this guy who is in Dubai saying, my life in Dubai, this is how I landed here, or has a YouTube page. That's what they listen to. They never go to the government website or what. And again, our policymakers do not give out so much. They just say this has passed. So the nitty-gritties are never laid out there in a common mwananchi language. Citizen, sorry, I'm using Swahili. Common mwananchi language. So it's more of the final outcome is announced, but not the nitty-gritty information to it. And perhaps these are the questions we need to start asking. So like when Kenya say there's free visa, and then later on, no, there's $30 that you need to pay. And then no, actually it will take 72 hours. So some people actually thought, wow, I'm just gonna jump on that plane. You get to the airport and also realize there are other stringent, rules attached to this whole policy outcome that we are not aware. So I think this is some of the things we need to discuss. And even that has also been very, if you follow these stories about bilateral agreements between the EU and African countries, including Rwanda, that was on the list the other day. Sometimes they don't even understand those. They don't understand because, unfortunately, many of our policymakers are detached from reality, if you ask me. They don't really put in consideration migrant experiences. Why do people migrate? Why do people migrate? We always assume that people migrate because they're looking for better jobs. Then you ask yourself, okay, we see people leaving jobs and also migrating. In fact, you think people migrate because they're poor, but then you realize actually when people get money is when they migrate. Because once you get a job, then you want to get another job. And actually, you see all those manner of whatever. So I think at the moment, if I'm being honest, we haven't had transparency there unless you make that genuine, an effort at a personal level as a traveler, as a migrant, as the person on the move to get this information. It is never discussed in detail. Only the policy outcome is announced by the politicians. That's what you will hear on news. Oh, there is free visa. And that's all. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I had a question, and I think it has also come in the chat. You know, yes, Kenya, Rwanda, they have taken this step. We have countries like Uganda, countries like Tanzania, Zambia, South Africa that are watching from afar, seeing what are the successes of these guys then. They've made their country visa-free, of course, with those regulations, but then they are watching what are the successes they should look out for. Yes, because this is like a case study and they're trying to see which one is the best position. Dr. Margaret, and then I'll go to Dr. Benjamin on the same question.
Yeah, I think I will agree with you. I mean, we see, let's see, let the brave ones test the waters for us and see how deep. If they're gonna fall by their heads, then we know that's not the way. Even though, honestly, these countries, I don't think they don't know the benefits of free movement. They do. And I just think it all boils down to interests. Because even Zambia you're talking about, I've studied Zambia in the last year, and I realized Zambia has some bilateral agreements with Namibia, with teachers going to which countries, It's weighing its capability to see how many are we producing and we don't need. It has even a very interesting, okay, maybe it's one of those pilot countries that are actually have passports for refugees. Now, provided by UNICEF, if I'm not wrong. No, I could be missing out. But then the refugees can now be allowed to move borders and even do business. And Zambia is one of those countries on the continent that is trying that out. I think up to now, maybe not up to 100 have received that. But I thought that is a very good initiative. So I think another issue that is also coming at play here is the different levels of economic development on the continent. So some countries are way much ahead, and that's why you see the big wigs are quiet. South Africa is quiet. Nigeria is quiet. Ghana is quiet. Why?
Talk of Nigeria.
Yeah, and then the Nigerians, they shouldn't submit. They're the ones who are moving most. They should have come with this free movement, free visa policy first.
I wish Ibrahim was here.
Yes, we should have seen it from them first, because actually, yeah. So I think that also the disparity in economic development plays, and then just political will is a big thing. It's a big thing. If there's no political will, it doesn't matter how good a policy is. The leaders will just sleep on it, even when its time has come. So yeah.
For sure. Thank you very much, Doctor. Dr. Benjamin, your take on that question?
Well, I mean, hard to tell. I mean, I can only second to what Dr. Margaret has said. And maybe there might be the danger that, I mean, people will, in the end, blame visa-free Kenya, visa-free Rwanda for issues which are totally unrelated to visa-free entry to the countries. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, people again, I mean, I'm European, so I can also talk a bit about the European Union. I mean, people are blaming EU for anything, you know, the bureaucrats in Brussels. And then easy, you mix things up, and then we say, yeah, well, it's also about, you know, these people coming from other European countries. And then you blame free movement for something which was rather created by national policymakers or by general economic trends nobody could hardly tackle, you know. So this might happen, but let's see. I think I can only agree also to Dr. Margaret when she said, I mean, policymakers, not only in Kenya and Rwanda and many other places, know the benefits of free movement, but knowing the benefits and communicating about the benefits, well, it's sometimes hard in political games, right?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. Now we're about to end the webinar. I don't like, you know, ending this webinar because it gets interesting each and every time. But we have no choice. So heading back to you, Dr. Benjamin, what are your parting shots? Yes, we have heard about the benefits and the implications of trade, talked about the issues of security, and also how, you know, some countries can also try to take this in direction. But then what are your parting shots?
Sorry, I had some could you maybe repeat your last question? Sorry.
Okay, so I was just asking for your parting shots now that we are coming to the end of the webinar.
Yeah, so my general conclusion is, I mean, it's I actually like that. I mean, we have these kinds of discussions on visa-free African countries, Rwanda, Kenya, visa-free regions, free movement in the regions. I mean, it's actually a good sign that also civil society, academic, and other actors, not only the top political haute volée is discussing those issues, and it's already been discussed at the UN level and AU level and so on, or the REC level. But I mean, we have a discussion on that, on benefits and risks. And again, maybe just to come back to one of my very first statements, we should not only reduce it to in general, not only the African context, but I mean, in a global context, if you will, we should not only reduce it to like economic benefits, but also discuss, I mean, what is it doing in the positive, maybe also in the negative to our societies, and what is the political narrative that is associated with the free countries and the free movement. Amen.
Yeah, thank you. You reminded me of a friend who was telling me that it was so easy for him to get a Schengen visa, but then he got denied to get a Tanzanian visa twice. So interesting. Dr. Margaret, what are your parting shots?
Yeah, I think for me, I agree with the doctor, is that these discussions are very important, especially now, like I mentioned, we see the AFCA, the trade agreement has taken off, and it's has taken off, and it's all over. It has a full secretariat, and there is support around it. So having these discussions, even these small baby steps that these countries are taking, allows this debate on free movement, the discourse on free movement, not to disappear at the expense of trade. So we continually want to catch up, to remind people, yes, that while you are talking about ratification of the CFTA, think about the free movement protocol as well, like reminding them certainly in many ways. So yeah, this is very bold of Kenya and Rwanda, and hopefully that these other countries will follow suit very soon. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, our attendees. We appreciate your attendance this evening. I see quite a lot of interesting discussions in the chat and some questions in the Q&A. Unfortunately, we weren't able to read everything. I think some questions were quite related to another, but thank you so much, Dr. Benjamin. Thank you so much, Dr. Margaret, and Dr. Jamela for joining us. She joined us